I am being rude. I just suddenly vanish unexpectedly. Okay, so should I actually talk about water and the environment as long as you are all here?
Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you for doing this. Yes, this is great.
I'm here. I have my notes to take notes and so forth.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I have a nice presentation, so I can just, Pastor Pete.
Pastor Peter?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
he needs
definitely.
to let her co-host so she can do all
Yeah,
her
it
sharing.
says that the host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh.
So you are going to have to pull over and do something about that.
Huh. I better do that.
Otherwise, we all get in our cars and head out to follow Pastor Peter.
No, you're all right. I got it.
Oh,
All right,
I'm
you
the
should be
host
good
now. Okay.
You're the host now.
Okay. Yep. Excellent.
Perfect.
All right.
Sorry about that.
Yep. No
That's okay.
problem. Okay. Everybody can see it now?
Yes, lovely.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
All right, there we go. There's always this kind of slight time delay. And so I often find that I'm clicking and then, I'm clicking and then it suddenly advances a couple of slides. So any guesses as to what stream this is that this opening slide is from?
I would assume Browns Creek.
It is. It's Browns Creek. Yep. The photo is right by the Stone Bridge overpass.
Oh, okay.
Yep,
Yeah.
right underneath the Stone Bridge underpass. Okay, so Minnesota Water Trends, Tales, and Tips for Making a Difference. Wanted to give an overview of what things are looking like in our area and some of the programs that we're working on and the results that we're seeing. And so just wanted to start with the question. Every year, Minnesotans spend millions of dollars in local, state, and private funding to protect and restore water resources. What do we have to show for our efforts? So that's a question that a lot of people are especially asking the legislature. We have clean water funds that are allocated through state sales tax since 2008. We're about halfway through the amount of time that Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment will be in effect. And so at the halfway point, that's when a lot of people are starting to ask, well, is this making a difference, allocating all this additional funding? We, for years, told people that about 40% of lakes, rivers, and streams were impaired, but had to update that just in the past year. PCA said that it's actually more like 56%. Which sounds bad. It sounds like we're getting worse. But the reality, it's kind of like the COVID-19 crisis, that a lot of the lakes and streams had never been tested. And so part of the reason it looked like we were doing better than we actually were is that we just finally got around to testing some of these more remote, more rural locations, and found out that a lot of places that were probably impaired all along actually are. So you might recognize this lake. This is another local one. Anybody? Right here in town, in Stillwater. This one's Lake McCusick.
Okay.
And Lake McCusick Lake McCusick is actually one of the only lakes in the state that has been delisted. This photo was taken about 10 years ago when it was listed as impaired, and the city and the Watershed Management Organization, PCA, have all been working. And the water quality is not perfect, but it's gotten better enough that it's been able to be taken off the list. So that's good news.
What are the measures you use to determine whether or not a lake is impaired or not? What are your qualifications?
Yeah, so they have different standards for shallow lakes and deep lakes. And one of the reasons that Lake McCusick was able to be taken off is that it's a shallow lake. And so they have slightly different standards. They look at both how clear the water is, like how deep down you can see when you're putting in a Secchi disc, and then they also
turbidity.
They're looking at like a number of factors. For Lake McCusick, it was phosphorus that was the problem, and so I can't rattle off the top of my head what the concentration is, but there's basically a concentration per micrograms of water that if you go over it, it's considered impaired, and under is still okay. So around the state, if you're just curious what the different impairments are, mercury is actually by far the largest source of water quality impairments in the state. And people are often surprised to hear this because we find it even in some of the really remote lakes up in the boundary waters, and it's because it's coming from atmospheric deposition. So mostly coming from things like gold mining, industrial processes, coal burning power plants. They release mercury into the air, and then it floats throughout the whole world, and it can come down in any location. It doesn't have to be someplace that's nearby where the factory is. So then that's the most common. We find E. coli in a lot of streams, particularly in rural and agricultural areas. And then nutrients is usually phosphorus. It can sometimes be a combination of a lot of nutrients. But in our area in Washington County, that's generally the most common impairment that we're finding in our area. Those two bottom ones, the fish bioassessments and benthic macroinvertebrate bioassessments, that is more like a symptom than the actual cause. So that just means when they're going out and they're surveying, they're not finding the right kind of fish, or they're not finding as many kinds of fish and insects as they think they should. And so that's generally an indication that something else is wrong, but it could be multiple problems. It could be something that they just haven't figured out yet. So just last year, the St. Croix River got added to the list. It had already been listed as impaired from Stillwater down to Prescott. It's during that part of the river, it's considered a lake. And they finally came out with large river standards as well. So they added on that stretch from Stillwater all the way north to Taylor's Falls. And that's another one where it was kind of a wake-up call for a lot of people to find out that the river was classified as impaired up there, where it's really pretty pristine. But the water quality didn't actually change. It was just that the PCA had finally come up with some kind of standard for looking at rivers, whereas previously they were only able to measure lakes for phosphorus. So we know that we need to reduce the phosphorus in the river by about 25–27% in order to bring it back to good health. And that's something that both Minnesota and Wisconsin have been working on for years now. At least 10 years, if not more. But not to be all doom and gloom, 49% of Washington County lakes actually have improving water quality. So over the past 10 years, a lot of our lakes have actually been getting better due to the work that we're doing in our area. The trout in Browns Creek are surviving again, which is really exciting. Yay! Because there was, a 5 to 10 year stretch where they weren't able to reproduce. So the DNR would stock them every year, and they would just swim around for that year. And over the winter, they would die, and they weren't able to reproduce. And now the Watershed District has done a lot of projects with private landowners, with the golf courses along the stream. They did some projects when the Browns Creek Trail was put in. And they are finding both trout and also some of the native fish in the stream as well. So that's exciting. There's other lakes around the county, like up in Forest Lake, there is a project going on that's going to keep 250 pounds a year of phosphorus out of Forest Lake and return another smaller lake to clear water. Here, I already mentioned McCusick as one that was able to come off the impaired waters list. And Lily Lake, another one here in town, the Middle St. Croix WMO just got a large grant. They're going to be working with the city and putting in a big project at the park that's right next to Lily Lake. And then in combination with that, doing an alum treatment. They've already over the past 10 years put in a lot of rain gardens in the neighborhood. They've done some shoreline restoration work right there in the park. And so this project is expected to be the final thing that will bring Lily Lake back to meeting water quality. So that is exciting. So then people often ask, why are we succeeding in some locations and not in others? And there's a few reasons. And some of it is just kind of the luck of the draw where a lake is located, and especially how dense the population is around it, how much available tax capacity there is to do work. So I've got examples of 3 different lakes here. One of them, the top picture, this is from Woodbury, Colby Lake. And this is an example where I don't want to sound pessimistic, but all the money in the world is going to still be really, really hard to fix Colby Lake because it's almost entirely developed around the lake. It's very low water quality. It's very hard to find opportunities to reduce phosphorus going into the lake. The watershed district has done a lot, but the lake water quality is still not great. Another example in the middle picture, you can see a lake that is pea green in an agricultural area. And these are really hard also because you generally might only have one landowner for the whole area. So you don't have a big tax base if you're going to be doing projects using property tax funding or sales tax funding. And generally, it's going to be something that's caused by agriculture that would be really hard to fix the lake unless you took that entire area out of production. So a lot of the places that we're seeing the best success is more like that Shields Lake and Forest Lake that I mentioned earlier. That's the bottom picture. And you kind of have this sweet spot where it's in a developed area within the metropolitan area. So there's a population, there's a tax base to have funding. There's local units of government, but as you can see from the picture, it's not a very developed lake. Even though it is in town, it's mostly woods and city parkland around the lake. So it's been relatively easy to fix the problem. But some of the key ingredients to success: cooperation, something called adaptive management and targeted implementation, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, education and civic engagement, and then super importantly, having dedicated staff and funding at the local level really, really is important. So in Washington County, we have 8 watershed management organizations. And where we are in Stillwater, you could be in one of 3. So if you are in like the downtown area, you're in the Middle St. Croix, WMO, the west side of town and the Browns Creek area, that's the Browns Creek Watershed District. And then the very north part of town, starting from like the Millbrook development and that whole northern area, is in Carnelian Marine, St. Croix. This is actually unique in Washington County that we have this many, and a lot of other parts of the counties they'll have, or parts of the metro, they'll have one big watershed district that covers multiple counties. So like the Rice Creek Watershed District that comes over here in the Hugo Forest Lake area, it actually stretches all the way over through Ramsey, Anoka, and Hennepin counties and drains into the Mississippi River. So it's like one big watershed district. But there's a lot of parts of the state that don't have watershed districts. So they don't have any local entity that is raising money or doing that kind of work. They're entirely dependent on having, you know, like the county government or a state government or a nonprofit. Here we have had for the past 15 years now a successful partnership where we've brought together the watershed districts, the cities, the county, and the conservation district to have this comprehensive education program. And it's led to a lot of other important partnerships as well. So that's something that's also unique here. It doesn't happen, unfortunately, everywhere in the state. There's a lot of places where these local governments might exist without ever talking to one another or without coordinating their efforts. And we do a really good job of that here. And then I just wanted to talk about the adaptive management, because this is something they've done a really good job of on Lily Lake. And, you know, back in the beginning when we first started doing conservation, people would put in projects that, you know, we knew were good projects, but we were just kind of putting them in willy-nilly wherever we found a willing landowner and hoping that it would help. And we've gotten much, much, much more scientific over the years. So if you look in the upper right-hand corner, there's this map, and it's got different colors, you know, blue, purple, green, orange. Our office worked with the Watershed Management Organization several years ago and did a study where they kind of mapped out the sub-watersheds that drain to the lake. And they figured out how much phosphorus was coming off the land. They're actually measuring the pipes going into the lake, and then they identified all of the best locations to put in a rain garden or to put in a native planting. So that's what all those little dots are. And they were really strategically placed, that they don't just put them in any old yard. It's in a specific location where it's going to do the most good for the lake. And then I had a photo here of my colleague Becca out collecting water samples, because that's kind of the important way of how we close the loop, that we have water monitoring crews that are out there testing the water to make sure that whatever we do actually is working, so that we can do something different if it's not. So I mentioned that the watershed districts don't exist everywhere, but here we do have them, and it's huge help. They are a local unit of government. They can levy taxes for flood control and water quality improvement projects through the property taxes. And they can establish rules for development, so that hopefully moving forward, all of the new development happens in a more responsible way, that it doesn't impact lakes and streams. And one of the things that's really nice about having local funding, we get a lot of state grants, but the state grants are usually only 2 or 3 years long. So it's very hard to get long-term projects accomplished through grant funding, because you're continually having to apply for grants. State agencies don't really like to give you grant money for the same project year after year after year. They always want you to be doing something new, something exciting. But a lot of these things, like fixing a lake, might take 10 years to do. So it's nice to have this local entity with local funds that can keep working on a project. They can get the plans in place. They can do the studies before they apply for the state grants. So we're kind of using the state funds to amplify what we're doing, but we wouldn't be able to get it done with the state funds alone. And I just wanted to mention one other big collaborative plan that's happening right now. It's called the Lower St. Croix One Watershed One Plan. And this is happening across 5 counties on the Minnesota side that are all working together to develop a plan for improving the lake, streams, and river in the Lower St. Croix watershed. So just a map of the area that it's covering. We've spent about 2 years putting together this plan, and it is currently out for public review. There's a website down here at the bottom, the www.lsc1w1p.org. It's a mouthful. So if you are super motivated, you can read through the plan and comment on it. It's one of those extremely, extremely long plans, but really the goal is just that we collaborate better with one another, with other partners outside the county, that we identify gaps, that those of us down in the south part of the watershed that have more resources, we share them with the folks up north in the watershed where they don't have as much resources, and try to just be efficient with our limited funds. Okay, any questions before I barrel along?
Oh, there's Diane.
I know, I was like, I bet you will recognize some of these people.
Angie, we have questions.
Okay.
How does the St. Croix River compare with other rivers in America in general in their water quality?
Okay, I'm just gonna stop the share real quick so that I can see while you're asking questions. So the St. Croix River is doing very good compared to most major rivers that go through metropolitan areas. In comparison with the Mississippi River, it is hands down way better. You can look at aerial photos where the Mississippi and the St. Croix intersect when they come down to Prescott, and it's like a blue river coming into a brown river. So in that regard, the St. Croix River, it's doing very good. Like, it's classified as impaired, but it's one that we feel like it's possible to fix. It's not, I don't ever want to use the word impossible, but some of them feel a lot less possible, and this one feels like we could do it. You know, it's really close. It's only a little impaired. If we all work together hard enough, we might be able to fix it.
Angie, this is all like totally new stuff to me, so I apologize for my question, but
Yeah.
you had a question about, or you showed the picture of Lily Lake, and then you showed the pictures of grassland or plants being built, or garden next door to it.
Yeah.
How do those two connect? What does growing plants do to the water?
Okay, yeah, I should have spent more time on that. So I'll talk about it a little bit more, but most of the water pollution is coming from runoff. So when it rains, all of the water that's coming off of people's rooftops and driveways, it's going into storm drains, and then those connect to Lily Lake, into other lakes. And one thing that we do is we put in rain gardens, and they kind of detour the water. So as it's coming down the street, there'll be a little curb cut, and the water goes in there and it soaks into the rain garden instead of continuing on to the lake. And in the process, any of the pollutants that are in the water soak into the ground, and they get naturally filtered by the soil. And then the other picture that I had shown was right along the edge of the lake. And we do a lot of shoreline stabilization plantings also to protect the soil from eroding along the edge of the lake. And they also act as a little bit of a buffer, that stuff coming off the parking lot will get filtered before it goes into the water also.
Angie, can I add a comment or two?
Yeah, go for it.
Rain gardens are the thing I'm into for master gardeners, but if you want to see some rain gardens, the Trinity parking lot has one, actually.
Yes.
Where the water, it's outside the, well, it's outside of the blue boxes where the outdoor mailboxes are. So you can take a look at that. And if you're familiar with Community Thread, which is the senior center in Stillwater, there's a huge rain garden behind that. Because before the rain garden was put in, there's this huge hill behind Community Thread, and all that water was coming down and going into the building. And so they had a real issue there. And this was before my time, but the watershed district, and it's not Brown.
I think it is Browns Creek, actually.
Is it Browns Creek?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Came in and did a landscape design, which has worked really well. The water no longer goes into the building.
Yeah.
So rain gardens have been really valuable for.
Yeah, that one was a neat project too, because right kitty corner behind Community Thread, there is an apartment building that,
Bodlovic.
yeah, that also has a lot of low income units, and there was the same issue is going on there. So we have kind of a connected system that goes through both Community Thread and the Ann Bodlovic apartments. Yeah.
So Angie, do they put in like retention ponds prior to getting into any of the watershed areas to kind of help with some of that? Well, so that, I mean, because I know some of the stuff is there's pumping and piping that goes from one lake to another to kind of control water levels and other things, and that's got to complicate matters.
Yep, it does. It very much complicates things. You know, in some places like further north in the county, there's a whole chain that connects like Big Marine, Big Carnelian, Little Carnelian, all the way down to the St. Croix River to reduce flooding risk for the homeowners on that whole chain of lakes. So they do have a combination of overland streams and then underground pipes that they have to minimize flood risk. In Stillwater, it's complicated because they have this diversion structure now that water, I'm probably not even going to get it right, but there was water from Long Lake that used to go into Browns Creek, and Long Lake is polluted, and they were trying to protect Browns Creek, so they made a diversion structure so that water wouldn't go into the creek anymore, and now it kind of bypasses and goes to Lake McCusick. And so now you have two neighboring watersheds that, you know, the water crosses between one and the other. But the retention ponds, that's a pretty typical part of developments that have happened since around 1978. They had a federal rule, so to say, that was passed around then to reduce the flood risk of new development. And so when you go around commercial areas and new developments, almost all of them have the stormwater ponds, and those help. And this is, the rain gardens are kind of an addition to that. The rain gardens aren't as good at preventing flooding. They're better for water quality. So in a way, we kind of need to have both kinds of strategies to protect against both flooding and water pollution.
So can I just remind people that Trinity has permeable or porous pavement too? And I think that does more for water quality than flood control too. But you know, you see these huge parking lots like at Target, and that water just rushes off. So hopefully that, pavement will be modified in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things is that, like I said, the watershed districts have development rules, but, you know, if something was built before the rule went into place, then it doesn't affect it retroactively. So for all new things happening, they get developed in a better way. And usually if a store is, say, reconstructing their parking lot, that will trigger a permit requirement and then they have to do something. But what we're struggling with is all the things that have already been built. And then, you know, those ones we just have to work with folks in a voluntary capacity and hope that they are willing to play along with us and that we can come up with funds and a good design that they're willing to go along with that.
Angie, does the district work with city? I mean, because I think so much of it is ordinances that the city has.
Yes.
And you know, with development, do you guys consult with them or?
We do. And in fact, we spent about 5 years just recently working with cities all up and down Washington County to update their stormwater ordinances, so that they would be in line with the watershed districts. And also, so we basically, they are now requiring new developments to be built in a way that they could capture the first inch of rain from any rainstorm. So that first, you know, the first inch of rain is usually what's the most polluted because it's the first thing that washes all the grime off of the streets. And so, yeah, so we worked with, and it's a super long process to update ordinances. You know, it's like somebody had to go through and they're reading through all this legalese and trying to find where the places are it needs to be updated, and then bringing it to the city council and the planning commission over and over until it finally gets to be something that they're willing to approve.
It's awful. It's a nightmare, kind of. Yeah.
But we did. We had 13 cities, and Stillwater didn't actually. They did it through policy instead of through ordinance. So they're still doing it in practice. Really, they just didn't want to take the extra effort to update their ordinances, so they just kind of changed it with their policies instead. But yeah, so let me reshare my screen and then can talk about some of the ways that the public can get involved. One of the things that we've done in the metro area for 15, 20 years now is work together with other watershed entities, other cities and counties around the 7-county metro area. So we have a campaign, Minnesota Water, Let's Keep It Clean. And over the years, we've pooled our money together to do things like create TV ads or radio ads, or just, you know, things that we couldn't do on our own. Most recently, we have a new website where we feature stories about people who are doing things to make a difference. And yeah, so here's Diane Vlasic that at least a couple of you recognized. So this campaign has also led to, do I have it here? Oh, has led to the Adopt a Drain program that I'll mention in a moment. That's something else that we're doing across the whole metro instead of just here in Washington County. But just wanted to highlight a few of the ways that we're engaging the public that have been really successful. One is the Blue Thumb Planting for Clean Water program. And this is a program that helps people to design native gardens, create rain gardens, and stabilize shorelines with native plants. And it's a partnership effort between native plant retailers, some of the private landscaping companies that specialize in working with native plants and building rain gardens, and a whole bunch of nonprofits and governmental entities. And this has been going for almost 15 years now. So in Washington County alone, I think we've probably constructed somewhere around 1,400 rain gardens.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's been very, very successful. People have really enjoyed, you know, getting into this kind of gardening. And the reason that we are promoting native plants for water quality, there's a lot of benefits of native plants for wildlife and for pollinator habitat. But for water quality, it all has to do with the roots. So I've got an arrow showing the Kentucky bluegrass. That's what people normally have in their lawns. And they just have these little tiny roots that are, you know, 2 or 3 inches deep. And in contrast, the native plants have root systems that can be 6, 8, 10, sometimes even 15 feet deep. So not only do they do a really good job of stabilizing the soil in hilly, shoreline, erosion-prone areas, they're better at soaking the water in when it does rain. And they are also less, they don't need to be watered during the summer. So they're better for water conservation as well. And something that's kind of interesting, like you see, it looks like all feathery with the roots. About a third of those will slough off every year, and it just leaves these little, almost like straw holes down into the soil. And so it helps to loosen and decompact soil over time also. I know I planted a bunch of these in my boulevard when we first moved into our house 8 years ago, and it was so rock solid I couldn't even get a shovel in to dig them in. And now it's all just soft soil, so over time, the roots really help with that as well. Back around 1885 or so, they compiled maps of what the native vegetation looked like in the Twin Cities area when European American settlers first started coming here. And this map is showing, what we could find. In Washington County, it was a lot of this light brown and kind of buff color, oak openings, barrens, prairie. As you get over into the West Metro, there was a lot more of the big woods. But in contrast, today, we have almost none of this natural habitat still remaining because we live here, because we've got farms and we've got houses and we've got businesses and roads. So nowadays we can only find native habitat remaining mostly along the river corridors, a little bit up in northern Anoka and Washington County and the Sand Plain and lesser developed areas. But that's another reason that it's really important for us to work with homeowners and plant native gardens in their yards, because it's one of the ways that we can kind of reconnect that patchwork quilt that exists right now. So just showing a couple photos of beautiful native gardens. I always start with this one for people who have a preconceived notion of what native gardens look like and think they might be messy. It can be super tidy looking. It can look like an English cottage garden. It can be wild and woolly if that's what you want it to look like. The native plants come in all different colors and varieties. And
Where do you get the native plants from?
Oh, yes. So if you go to the bluethumb.org website, they have a whole list of native plant retailers. Did I include the slide? There's quite a few here locally or semi-locally. If you go up toward Franconia Sculpture Garden, Landscape Alternatives will be right on your left as you're driving up. They're a really good one. Dragonfly Nursery, which is in Amory, Wisconsin. They're a really big one that has a lot of native plants. Outback Nursery down in Hastings, they have quite a few. We usually, around this time of year, would be having plant sales. And a lot of the plant sales have gotten canceled, so that's hard at this year in particular. It's making it a little harder to connect people with plants. I'm just showing a few pictures. We do end up working with a lot of people in Washington County who own large acreage, so we're also able to do full-scale habitat restoration instead of just making little native plant gardens. And I love prairies, so I figure it never hurts to show a couple of pretty prairie photos. I mentioned before that the natives are good also for the pollinators. And just a video of how these rain gardens work. This is one of the ones in Stillwater in my house. So the water is going into this little round thing, and then it kind of catches the leaves, and then the water fills up the rain garden. And that detours it from going down to a storm drain that's a little further down the street. And some of the many rain gardens around Stillwater that our office has helped to build. We work with a lot of people in shoreline restoration also. Same idea, taking the turf grass and pulling it back to put some native plants along the shoreline to help with erosion control. This is Marge Stagsetter.
Yes.
Yes, if you've been there before, Joan. Yep. And then there's also some other alternatives to traditional lawn that people are interested in. Low-mow and bee-friendly are a couple of options. This one is a home that's up on the north hill of Stillwater, overlooking the St. Croix River, gorgeous view, obviously. But the grass that's in the closest to us in the picture is actually a low-mow variety that you can plant, and it only needs to be mowed maybe once a year. It has a little bit deeper root system and is more drought tolerant. So that's a good option. Here's another photo of a low-mow. It kind of looks messy. So some people like it, some people hate it, but it's a good alternative to traditional turf grass. There's a couple of places locally that people often ask where they can get those seeds, a couple of places locally that you can order them from. And people have also in recent years been getting interested in creating these bee lawns, where it's a lawn that isn't just grass, it's a lawn that also has low growing flowers. So it provides a little bit of nectar for bees during the spring and the summer as well. And most of those have a couple of components. They've got this grass, pine fescue grass,
Self-heal.
self-heal, creeping thyme, Dutch white clover. A couple of native species can also be used that grow well, ground plum, this coreopsis and calico aster. And if you mow over them, I mean, they're the kind of plants that would get bigger, but if you mow over them, they'll just kind of get trained to flower down low. But it's the kind of thing that you would mow.
What?
I'm going to see if I can make that stop somehow. There's got to be a way I can do that, right?
You can.
There. Okay, sorry, I muted everybody. I'll unmute you all in a moment. I couldn't figure out which one was the one that was giving the feedback. And then we just talked to people about things that they can do with their regular lawns also. Putting in a smart controller to not water as much, having taller grass, mowing more frequently, but keeping the grass a little bit taller to help prevent injuring the grass. And this new program, Your Yard Can Be the Change, there is new state funds through the Board of Water and Soil Resources to help people create pollinator-friendly gardens and lawns. It's called the Lawns to Legumes funding. And so we have been working with people around the county to create native gardens, putting on coaching workshops and raising public awareness about the kinds of plant species people can put in their gardens to be able to support bees and butterflies. Board of Water and Soil Resources also has some really good resources on their website, so I included links to that. And brand new this year, for anybody who happens to live in Oak Park Heights, they have a $250 pollinator grant that is available to any residents who want to plant pollinator gardens in their yard. So that's kind of an exciting thing too. I'll just mention that we did a mapping effort 2 years ago to identify the best locations for pollinator habitat restoration in the county. And using this, everything that is red on the map within Washington County is a location where we identified as kind of a sweet spot where we could get the most bang for our buck in being able to restore marginal habitat to good quality habitat and provide some really good improvement connectivity for pollinators in the county. And with creating so many more rain gardens, we discovered that these rain gardens all need to be maintained. And so have in recent years worked with Sustainable Stillwater and the city of Stillwater to create an Adopt a Rain Garden program where volunteers agree to take care of rain gardens that are in the city right of way, or some of them have been built on a person's property that maybe they were young enough to take care of it when they first built the garden and now they're older and can't take care of it on their own anymore. But we've had a couple of cleanup events, and have just been signing people up on their own to adopt rain gardens. You can go on the website and there's a map that shows all the rain gardens in Stillwater, and all the ones that are blue have already been adopted. And then all of those red ones are still available for adoption. But we have successfully, here's my numbers, gotten 67 rain gardens adopted in the past 2 years. So that has been a really fun and successful program to engage people. We had another volunteer program, the Master Water Stewards, that we got special grant funding for, and got 20 volunteers, kind of super volunteers, who went through training very similar to what Master Gardeners do. They took 50 hours worth of online and in-person coursework, and they completed a capstone project, and now they are kind of super volunteers working in our communities. Any of you know John Hodler from church?
Yep.
Yep, he's one of my Master Water Stewards. So, yep. And he converted his lawn to Prairie, or a portion of his lawn to Prairie, and then he's been working with the city of Lake Elmo to pilot a irrigation controller program with neighborhoods in Lake Elmo. So he got a whole bunch of neighbors to agree to put in these irrigation controllers to reduce their water use. The Adopted Drain program is one that we're doing across the whole metro with that Watershed Partners group that I mentioned. And people just agree to adopt a storm drain that's close to their house and go out there once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks when it's getting covered up with leaves and grass clippings, and just scoop all that up and get it out of there so it doesn't get washed into lakes and rivers. We had a big campaign just last month for Earth Day. It was the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And so we already had a lot of drains that were adopted, but got probably 1,000 new drains adopted across the whole metro just in the month of April. So right now we have 11,664 drains adopted across the whole Twin Cities, and 447 adopted in Washington County, which I think is pretty awesome because we just started this campaign last March. So that's been really cool to see people get engaged, and it's one of the few things people can do right now when we had to cancel all our volunteer events. This is something that people can still do on their own, even while we're all far apart. Okay, so there you have it. That's what's happening with the water here in our area.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Angie, have you watched, PBS had a 3-part series on H2O, the molecule, and I forget the rest of the title of it, but it was on water throughout the world.
No.
A great series.
Really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it.
Each and three series on it. But it was just fabulous, and it was showing how there's a discrepancy in the various, parts of the world for water, and how we're managing to mess up the whole water system by some of the things that we do.
Yeah.
So go to PBS, and maybe whoever else saw it could come up with the real title, but it started out with the H2O molecule.
Okay.
Yeah, there's 3 of them. The second one was on civilization.
Yep.
And if you are a member of TPT, you can sign up to have Passport, and you can go online and watch them anytime.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if you're a member of TPT, I don't know if there's even a minimum requirement or whatnot as far as how much you've donated, but they have a thing called Passport. You set up your Passport, and then you can watch all these shows. And this is one, and it's relatively new, so it's going to be available. But yeah, really, really interesting.
Yeah, we just worked with TPT to put together this little, it's like a 1.5 minute long animated film for the Adopted Drain program. So that's apparently running right now for the rest of the year. But yeah.
Good.
Very cool.
I'm almost exhausted hearing everything that you have been working on.
I know. It is at times exhausting, and
it's impressive to see what efforts are being made.
Yeah.
you know, a
But-
lot of us probably don't know about.
Yeah, and we're all small government. So, you know, my office is fairly large. We have 15 staff people, which still isn't that big, but, you know, most of the watershed districts, some of them only have one staff person. Middle St. Croix only has one half-time administrator. A couple of them have like 2 or 3 staff people. So it's really, yeah, like a lot of work to get done with not very many people to do it. And if you know, you look at Washington County, we've got something like 250 lakes in the county and a dozen trout streams, the St. Croix and the Mississippi River, groundwater. It's just, yeah, it's kind of overwhelming how much water there is to do.
Well, you know, one thing, and maybe you're already aware of this, and unfortunately this is because of the way we have to be kind of shuttered at home. It's not possible this year, but Washington County has a pretty strong 4-H program.
Yes.
And there may be options in the future to try to work with them to see about getting involvement, because those kids look for projects, and there's, you know, there's probably going to be some with a little bit of guidance that they might be able to really be a helpful force in doing some of the things, or even in just what they do as far as promoting what is happening. So that could be a resource in the future if you haven't already tapped into that.
Yeah, we've a couple times done activities with them for some of their summer camps that they'll put on. But yeah, I'm also really excited about the Master Water Stewards, because now I've got these 20 volunteers that are just kind of actively doing things in their own neighborhoods. And like this summer, I've been trying to think of creative ways to engage with the public in the real world, not always on a computer screen, but without us being able to gather in groups. And so, you know, I'm coming up with these like water pollution whodunit games, and then sending it out to my Master Water Stewards and saying, hey, like you could set this up in your park. And then I don't have to try to drive around the county and set up 20 different games in 20 different parks, but, you know, just to kind of try to multiply the impact that we can have. So, yeah.
You know, when I feel like we're so, I know there's a lot that doesn't get done and everybody's stretched, but I feel like we're so lucky to live in Minnesota. Because I think there is generally a commitment to clean water, and there's a, you know, we're just lucky.
Yeah, we really are. And if you look at, for example, the watershed districts, those only exist in Minnesota. It's a unique unit of government we have here. They don't have them in Wisconsin. They don't have them in Iowa. So I've gone to a couple of national conferences, and I'll be talking about the work we're doing. And then people are like, well, I don't get it. Like, who did that? Where did you get the money from? Because they're doing a lot of the same work we do, just through nonprofits that they're, you know, that they're just constantly trying to fundraise and get donations. And it's a lot harder than if you have a dedicated government unit that can do it.
Yeah, very good.
One of the things that strikes me too, Angie, and thank you so much for the plethora of information. I love it. And I'm wondering just about, it seems like we're getting a lot better data now in terms of kind of what's working and what are the best practices, and I love how you're equipping, you know, people to really care really for their neighborhoods and kind of where they're at. I love that idea. But talk a little bit about like how your team uses the new information and kind of some of that mapping and the data and how that's changed.
Yeah, well, and a lot of that data collection has become possible because of the Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment. So our office has been doing water monitoring on lakes and streams around the county for, you know, at least 10 years on most lakes. Some of them it's been more like 20 years. But we started doing those sub-watershed analyses once we had funding through the Clean Water grants, and have been kind of picking off different lakes around the county where we have local interest, and you know, just every time there's a new round of grants, applying for more funding to be able to do those studies. And that has really, really helped, like you said, to be able to make sure that we're putting the right projects in the right places, and also that it helps us to be able to get future grants when we can do a study and say, okay, if we can put an iron enhanced sand filter right here on this property, it's going to capture this much phosphorus and it's going to, you know, solve the lake problems. And that's a lot more compelling than just saying, well, we have a dirty lake and we're going to do something about it.
Yeah.
So one thing that
No,
might
it's
be
really cool.
one thing that might be really cool is to see if, as a Trinity community, if there would be a group of people specifically that would be interested in taking on a project. You know, and maybe even, you know, more with families or something like that. I'm not exactly sure how to get something like that organized, but I'm wondering if we could somehow get that promoted in involvement so that there could be a Trinity team, not only for us to do that work, but also for building some more community around something that people may have a passion about, but really don't know where to go, and create that within the Trinity community to go out. So that would be a really cool thing to be able to somehow foster.
Yeah, I know, like Nicolette Grapple, she had organized the past 2 years in a row an Earth Day cleanup, and families loved it, you know, because it was something really tangible, hands-on, that you can do even if you've got pretty little kids. And this year's one, unfortunately, we weren't able to do, but hopefully in the fall, when Community Thread has their river rally, Trinity might be able to participate in that again. Last year we had a team.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Helped out on the river rally day.
Yeah, we did some storm
Yes,
sewer
I
things.
know.
Yeah.
I have a picture of Sheila riding a broom like a witch.
Yeah.
So it's always hard. There's so many things to get out there, but you know, it would be really great to build a team somehow.
Yeah. Yep, I agree. Okay, well, everyone, shall we go on with our days?
Yes, thank you,
Angie, this
Angie,
was
very
great.
much.
That's great.
Okay. Well, it was good to see you all virtually.
Thanks,
Thank
Angie.
you
Okay.
so
Angie.
much.
All right.
Have a
bye,
happy
everyone.
Mother's Day.
Yep, happy Mother's
care.
Day to you all.
Thank you.